Ladies and gentlemen, this session, Rebuilding Detroit Schools for Tomorrow's Opportunities, is hosted by the Skillman Foundation. Please welcome President and CEO of United Way for Southeastern Michigan, Herman Gray.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. I am delighted to be here this morning. I am President and CEO of United Way for Southeastern Michigan, as mentioned, but importantly for this session, I have the privilege to serve as a Skillman Foundation trustee, and I'm a member of the steering committee of the Coalition for the Future of Detroit's Children. And this is a session that seems in many ways a continuation of a conversation we've been having over a number of years. I think many of you will remember the mayor's really extraordinary remarks that he made in last year in the general session as we were wrestling with the Michigan legislature and how we could help to move the needle on Detroit schools. And this is a continuation of that conversation. It's a conversation that is vitally important to the health and well-being of our state and to the city of Detroit and Southeast Michigan, certainly. We're delighted to see so many people here this morning. Thank you so much for being here. I think we have really an exceptional panel for you to interact with this morning. We're going to show a video in just one brief moment, but first I'd like to acknowledge if there are any DPSCD board members here. If you could please stand and be recognized. Board Chair Iris Taylor right in front of me. It's the only time that I have missed seeing Iris, so I apologize there, my dear. It's good to see you. And any members of the coalition that are here. Thank you so much. Good to see you all. And unless I forget and get excommunicated from the Skillman family, I would call your attention to your tables. There are annual reports from the foundation there at your table, so please peruse those at your leisure. And lastly, Interim Superintendent Alicia Merriweather, I'm told you're in the room. I don't know where you are, but please stand and be recognized. Just an extraordinary effort in the last year, and we're grateful for you, Alicia. And with that, let's see the video that will set a little bit of context for us. Slides, not video. Thank you. And I'm going to let you read through these yourselves. Thank you. I think if we could both go back in time briefly, and when the coalition was formed, and people saw the membership of that coalition, I think people would have declared it a success if a fight had not broken out during the meeting of the coalition, bringing together people of all different sort of political persuasions and backgrounds, and there. I think it was modest expectation for that. And if at that time you've been told that at the end result of their work that the debt of the old district would be transferred to the old district, that a new district would be created, with a fresh start, that there would be an elected school board elected by the people of the city, and that it would be a high quality board, I think we would consider that a big, huge win. And clearly an opportunity. And so in that context, I'd like to introduce our panel members this morning. First, I'm happy to introduce Aaron Einhorn, who will serve as the moderator for the panel. Aaron is the editor of Chalkbeat Detroit. and an award-winning journalist, and we are grateful for her being here. And the Skillman Foundation was instrumental in bringing Chalkbeat to Detroit. John Ricolta, who arguably needs no introduction, and particularly to this audience, who heads Wallbridge, a global construction company that does extraordinary work around the world, and an extraordinary individual who leads it. And John has been committed to this work in education with the kind of passion that he's been known to bring to everything that he does. And lastly, it's certainly my pleasure to introduce to you, many of you, Dr. Nikolai Vitti, our new superintendent of the Detroit Public School Community District, who comes to us from the Duval School District in Jacksonville, Florida, a district of roughly 100,000 or so children there, 100,000 children there, a large school district. The word on the street is that Dr. Vitti visits a school or two every single day, that he knows children's names in those schools and teachers' names, and that he's a ball of energy. I don't like the word workaholic, but he's got lots of passion and energy for his work. And so this is your panel, and I will now turn it over to you, Aaron. Thank you very much again for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Gray. I appreciate that introduction and background, and thanks to all of you for coming out. It's a standing room only crowd, which is really obviously speaks to the importance of the issues we're talking about here, so that's really terrific. And also thanks to the panelists, especially Dr. Vitti. As some of you may know, he just started a new job, so he's probably pretty busy. He's actually got to find schools for his 4 children, ideally in DPSCD, right? He's got to find a house in Detroit and navigate the real estate finances of Detroit, which aren't simple. So we're really glad that you were able to come up today. So just a couple of quick ground rules before we get started. Panelists, we have limited time. Please keep your answers as tight as humanly possible. Audience, there are some cards on the table, I think they're green, where you can write your questions. We're going to reserve the last 15 minutes for audience questions, so send us your questions. And raise your hand if you've written a question, and someone will come pick it up and bring them to me, and we'll ask. You can ask of any of the panelists. So before, just to kind of dive right on in, I know you all probably want to hear from the new guy, but before we get started, we're going to start with John Ricolta, because I think it's really significant that we're having this conversation here at this conference at this time, because those of you who were up here last year remember that Detroit Public Schools were in a really different place last year at this time, and there was a lot of, question if the district was, on the brink of bankruptcy, and what was going to happen with the Detroit Education Commission and with the legislation, and there was all this kind of, tumult here, going on up here around Detroit Public Schools, and a great deal of things have happened in the last year. So just kind of as an opening to kind of get this going, I wanted to ask John Ricolta to kind of give us a sense of, where are we now? What's happened in the last year? I know the coalition had some things it was pleased with, some things it was pretty disappointed with the final legislation. But what do we have to show for the last year?
Well, thank you. I think the first thing that we have to show for it is a real big check of somewhere in the neighborhood of $675 million that the state gave to the district in order to reset the financial trajectory of DPS. You cannot underestimate the value of that and what that has done to sort of reset the clock. And to the legislature and the governor, we owe them a really big thanks, because it was really a tough political uphill battle. It took 2 years in order to convince the legislature that this needed to be done, and that it wasn't DPS's fault. It was characterized as another Detroit bailout, but that was as far from the truth as you could possibly get. The state had, as you recall, run the district financially for the last 10 years, and it had really run up this debt on its watch. Secondly, the elected school board, I believe, performed so admirably that it just gives me such great hope that we're now standing on this precipice of opportunity to really remake DPS. And I went to DPS. I'm a graduate of the elementary portion of that way back in the 60s. And I can't stress the importance of how great the school board actually behaved. And I think the real test from my standpoint came during the selection of Dr. Vitti here. There was a specific point in time where there was a lot of pushback from the community. And the school board had done their homework. They chose a world-class search firm, created a set of criteria that was second to none, shortlisted 3 candidates, interviewed them extensively, listened to their plans, and when they came out with that shortlist, there was this concern that there wasn't enough time. And there were these special interest groups who came forth and began to put pressure on the school board. You don't hear too much about this, but they stood really tall. They were confident of their approach, and they ultimately selected what they believed to be the best candidate, and they went for it. And here we sit today with Dr. Vitti, and I want to just tell you that I have a friend in Jacksonville, Florida, who Dr. Vitti knows. I know him very well. I sit on another board with him. And the day that the shortlist came out, he called me up, and he said, "John, this is going to be a great day for Detroit and a really sad day for Jacksonville." He said, "You have no idea that the talent and what this man can do for you." So when you look about what the school board did, the debt relief, and then the final thing that's really big is that we got back the EAA, which was a community irritant, plus it adds about 5,000 more students, which means there's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million more in revenue that's coming into DPS right now. Those are 3 gigantic wins. And so the attitude and the mood of this conference or this seminar or panel discussion today would be more about the opportunity that we have going forward.
Okay. All right. So, Dr. Vitti, you've now, this is day 8, is it?
6.
It's day 6. Okay, sorry. So 1 week in, you visited a bunch of schools. You've seen a bunch of things. Give us a sense. How's it going? What have you learned? Any surprises that you've learned over this last week, and anything you can fix? Things you know right now that are changes you're going to make that you think can help move the needle in Detroit schools.
Well, first off, good morning. Want to acknowledge Dr. Taylor here and Alicia Merriweather, and I'll begin my comments focused on Mrs. Merriweather. It's not easy to be in her position right now, and I'm walking into a school district that has been led admirably over the last year through Mrs. Merriweather's leadership, and I want to publicly acknowledge that. And despite what people may have thought in coming in, we have worked very well together. It's been a smooth transition. I consider her a colleague, an ally in this work, and it's been nothing but a pleasure to work with her. And I think we're going to hopefully continue to work together. What I see when I visit schools and I meet with folks inside the organization, I see a group of individuals that are deeply committed to children. And I see a system that has gone through trauma, been a part of chaos, but have focused on children. And considering all the drama that they've been a part of, it is miraculous that we're still educating children with a degree of focus, with all the leaders that have come and gone, the different governance structures. And I say all of that to say now it's time to shift. It's now time to be a strategic, thoughtful, active organization, not one that is reactive, not one that is passive, not one that is waiting for someone else to determine or another entity to determine its fate, but to take ownership of what we know a world-class large urban school district looks like and build the systems and the processes to do that. And the time is now. So I think we have to recognize the past, understand the pain that's connected to that past, because it's real. You hear it from teachers on a daily basis. But you also see the beauty of already what's happening in the school system. So by seeing the beauty, you see what can be scaled for all children. And we're at an important juncture, and I'm proud and humbled to be the leader of the organization that's about to step into the next era of school reform.
So anything you're going to change?
Yes, I will change a lot. And it will come initially in increments. And I think the most significant changes will come in the 18-19 school year. There are some adjustments I think that can be made by June 30th regarding the organizational structure. Those will be somewhat limited, but this next year will be about building a team of, I believe, future superintendents, an A cabinet made up of those from the outside and some from the inside, and we'll slowly start to rebuild a system. And then the majority of the reform will happen with the next budget cycle in 18-19.
Okay, all right. So Dr. Gray, you've probably seen a lot of new people coming in with a lot of big ideas who said they were going to fix things, they were going to improve things. A lot of Detroit teachers have seen a lot of people coming in, sort of a lot of previous hopeful moments. Is there anything different this time around?
I think history will be the judge of that, certainly, but I am very hopeful. I think the stars are aligning in a way that makes sense. We have a clean slate, as John pointed out, from a financial perspective. We have a high-performing elected school board. We have a proven leader who is getting started, proven with results. And I think there's a sense in the community that it's about time, and we need to get to really the transformative work of educating our children and youth. And what I'm really struck by, and we were talking about this just really very briefly, is that typically when a new person is named to this position, as the 400 prior have been, is that people immediately sort of take sides, that camps immediately sort of get established, and the guy or gal comes in with challenges from day one, and the sort of lack of that community support. And I hear from leaders of the teachers union, leaders of the district, just the man on the street, woman on the street perspectives that we need to make this work this time. This is an opportunity that may not present itself again for perhaps decades, and so we need to take advantage of it. And from a selfish vantage point at United Way, we're really focused on that word united, and that we need to wrap our arms around the school district and help its leader and the teachers in that district to be successful. It's in all of our best interest to do that. We are not educators. When I ran Children's Hospital, I probably would have objected if lay people came in and advised our neurosurgeons on how to conduct neurosurgery. Similarly, I object to non-educators thinking they actually can just read a book about it or stay in a Holiday Inn and be educators. And so we have to acknowledge, recognize the expertise, the professionalism of our teachers and those who have committed their professional lives to care for children, and support them in any way, shape, and form that is reasonable, and support the strategic vision of the leadership.
Yeah, right. All right, so Dr. Beatty, we are in a room full of a lot of influential people, movers, shakers in business and government, politics, policy. What can the people in this room do to support your work? I mean, I know that everybody wants to help, and in theory they're going to help, but what would be the most helpful thing that the people in this room can do for the children of Detroit?
I think it's at some level acknowledging that change is here. I think people have become fatigued in Michigan, even in Detroit, about the concept of renaissance, revitalization. I think you've heard that with maybe different administrations, different governance structures. I think people have to truly understand that local control is essential to reform. The community has to have a voice in the reform process, and they have that with 7 elected board members. And you have a superintendent who has transformed schools and school districts, so you have a track record. It's time to believe that change is here and can happen. And I think there's also needs to be a recognition that despite talk and reality of a city revitalization economically, that will never reach its apex without a great public school system. It won't. It will get better. Businesses will invest. Money will be generated, but it will never reach its apex without people moving back into the city. And people will not move back into the city in large numbers unless they have a school system that they feel comfortable sending their children to every day. That has to be aligned, and it has to happen in concert with one another. And so all of you, whether you're on the political side, the business side, or just a citizen, it's believing that it can happen, but it's then trying in some way to put a shoulder to the wheel of that work. And on a political side, that means demanding that improvement happens, short term, but having realistic expectations regarding that improvement. But demanding that improvement is made and that there are signs of structures and systems evolving, improving the inputs that lead the outputs, which is student achievement. That financially, we are transparent, that we're aligned and we're solvent. Those are simple goals that I think can be met and have been met and will continue to be met. But eventually moving to establishing, protecting the governance model as it is for these short-term, more long-term goals to be met, but then shifting to investment. And a lot of people are beginning to invest economically in Detroit, but there needs to be investment in children. And that investment comes through wraparound services. You know, when you can't talk about our school system and our children if you're not talking about poverty. And so there has to be ways of overcoming literacy challenges at young age, early learning opportunities, access to address social emotional needs, mental wellness needs. Those are real factors that get in the way of being on grade level in reading, math, science, and social studies. So investing in that and investing in programs. Our children need access to high-level programs no differently than children have access to those programs in private schools. And so we also, lastly, have to recognize that that investment in children in the school system, directly, indirectly, is an investment in the city. And Michigan will never also reach its apex without a strong Detroit. I think everyone understands that. So it's an investment that yields multiple return on investments in many different factors and in ways, because Detroit ultimately is the engine of the state. And that investment is most warranted and needed with youth and the future generation of employees and citizens.
All right. Audience, just a reminder that if you do have questions, you should write them on the green cards and hold them up, and we'll be able to ask those questions in a little bit. But John McCoulter, I want to ask you the same question. So, what do you think the business community can do to support the district, support the children of Detroit?
Well, number one, there is such a tremendous need for talent in the job market today. Right now, there are 65,000 high-skilled jobs in the state of Michigan that are unfilled. 65,000. Georgetown University just did a study at the end of last year about President Obama's economic engine, and they found that he and his administration created 11 million new jobs. 8 million of those new jobs went to workers who had a 4-year college degree. 2.9 million of those jobs went to individuals who had some continuous training after high school diploma. The military, trade school, apprentice school, and there's one more that slipped my mind. Only 80,000 jobs out of that 11 million went to what you would refer to as low-skilled workers who had either a high school diploma or less. If we don't fix this, we aren't going to have a workforce that's going to keep Michigan competitive on the global scale. That's number one. And so, number two, what can business do? We have to get engaged. And the coalition proved that people of different political persuasions and philosophies can get something done on education. In our particular company, we have numerous interns that we bring in on an annual basis during summer programs and introducing these children to what it's like to work in an environment that produces a check, self-esteem, and pride in accomplishing something. Number two, there are school boards all over the place that need well-qualified people to actually get involved. But I think the absolute biggest thing that business can do is to provide the opportunity and to show that there is a thriving environment that these children can participate in and can succeed in.
Aaron, could I add to that?
Sure.
So if you look at American high schools, I think you could make the argument that the 11th and 12th grade experience is largely irrelevant today. And I think the opportunity in the future is making that 11th and 12th grade year a springboard to college or the world of work, and being very explicit and intentional about the pathway to do that. Certainly, we already have advanced placement courses. We want to expand ACE, Cambridge, International Baccalaureate, and most importantly, dual enrollment in early college programs so students can earn credit in high school, which helps them ease, for them, parents, the burden of tuition, but it builds that confidence. But the workforce development is key. And we have to become comfortable with talking about students leaving high school and moving immediately in the workforce to make a wage and benefits that can support a family. And so I'm very interested, based on John's point, in building very explicit pathways regarding internships, job shadowing opportunities, so that students can earn industry certification and other economic opportunities in the 11th and 12th grade, which is a win-win. Our role as a school system is to make sure that children are highly literate, they're critical thinkers, can analyze, synthesize information, stand up in front of people and articulate a position, work in small groups, problem solve. That's our role as a school system. That starts in pre-K. But the latter part has to culminate with something real and tangible, especially for our children in Detroit, which is either college or the world of work. And that's where I think the businesses can step in to offer that pipeline opportunity at the end of the road.
And I would just add that this is not just aspirational language. This is happening today in the Detroit Public School Community District. United Way is in 15 high schools. We're in the process of developing, it's a 5-year plan for these schools, college and career pathway work with themed academies in these schools that bring corporations and business into the schools in an organized way that is collaborative with the educational system and not disruptive to it, and paint a picture for young people of what the possibilities are. It's hard to achieve something if you've never seen it. And certainly we know that all children come to this world as blank slates. And the difference between their ultimate outcomes and their productivity and who they become is based on the opportunity that's presented to them and the vision and the dreams that they are able to dream. And so the broader community can support business. The broader community can believe that children, whatever their economic status happens to be, can achieve. And the community needs to say that out loud. And lastly, the community can support and should support the teachers who are doing this really very challenging, difficult work. We have a city that has one of the highest poverty rates of any major city in America. That is not inconsequential in terms of what children experience on a daily basis, what they see, how they walk to school, what they see in their own homes, what they see in other people's homes. We now have brain science. We know what happens. We can see it on imaging studies that children are experiencing toxic stress, and we need to help them become resilient to that stress in ways that are tangible and real. And this is work that can be done. with the community and corporation and businesses support.
So just, I know you, did you want
I
to
just
follow
want to
up
make
with-
one more point about what businesses can do, and that is that we all have a very powerful voice, both in the community and in Lansing. And we have to find a way that we utilize that voice to raise K through 12 education to its highest priority. And I can tell you from personal experience of working on this issue for going on 3 years now, is that if you actually go up to Lansing and sit down with your lawmakers, they will listen. And when we first started this process, everyone said this is dead on arrival. But yet we sit here today with quite a bit of success under our belts. And so every single person in this room at this conference has a very, very loud voice in Lansing. And we need to find a way to use it and use it on a very regular basis.
So Dr. Vitti, I wanted to ask you a question about charter schools. During your interview process, you spoke with some, shall we say, bravado about how you're going to put charter schools out of business. That kind of caught my attention because I know a lot of advocates for children in Detroit talk about how sort of one of the problems that we have as a result of our split system, and the schools in Detroit are roughly half charter, half traditional district schools, and a lot of Detroit children go to suburban schools, and there's this sort of dissent, and that creates a whole bunch of problems that a lot of people believe would be better solved through collaboration. Transportation comes to mind, a whole host of other teacher recruitment, things like that could be done collaboratively. So, I mean, given you've raised concerns about charter school authorization and oversight and things like that, but how do you see a role for charter schools in for collaboration, and how do you see kind of navigating around that, especially given some of the public comments you've made on the subject?
Sure. Individually, I don't have a problem with good charter schools if children are being educated at a higher level than they would be in a traditional public school system or individual school. I think we've had enough time in Michigan, in Detroit, and nationally to recognize that charter schools are not the at-scale solution to improving public education. That is defined. And if we're still having a conversation about them, then I frankly would just suggest it's the wrong conversation. I think we should start talking about the right guardrails to allow innovation through charter schools to continue in Detroit, and I would even say nationally throughout the state of Michigan. That's not happening right now. We have to have better quality control for the initiation of a charter, and that the individuals or group that has a concept or idea have a proven track record of success, because every year that a child is in a situation that they're not learning, they get farther behind, and when you're talking about poverty, that's already exacerbated. So I'm completely willing to work with charter schools that are proven. But my responsibility is for the 46,000 students in the traditional public school system, and that will be my obsession. And as we improve the quality of their educational experience, back to my earlier comments about putting charter schools out of business, I believe that when traditional public schools do it right, they do it better than any other form of education, including private, by the way, because it's the most organic experience, and it's greatly connected to the neighborhood and to the community, and it has a higher level of accountability. And so when it's done, I think it's done. When it's done right, it's done better. And I think when parents see the difference in their own children's experience, they're going to talk to one another. That will spread, and we'll have parents come back. I also believe that we have they'll come back, and part of this conversation has to be thinking about a group of parents that right now are not even thinking about our public school system. And these are parents that are thinking about coming back to Detroit or going to Detroit for the first time. So we have to have a three-tiered approach: retention, recruiting those that have left, parents, and then thinking about a whole different group of parents. And I believe that has to be owned through the traditional public school system. I am completely comfortable with parents having the right to pick the education that is best for their child. I think parents should be empowered to do that. But there has to be guardrails. There has to be quality control. It cannot be an experiment. And what I have seen in the landscape of Detroit and Michigan is that those guardrails have not existed, and we've gambled too much with children's education, and that's not right, especially to our most vulnerable children.
So I'm going to get to the audience questions in just a minute, but first, really quickly, I'm wondering if John or Herman, if either one of you would like to ask any questions specifically of Dr. Beatty.
Well, Dr. Beatty and I had a nice phone call yesterday, and I brought up what I consider to be 4 things that needed to be fixed immediately. And I can tell you he's a really good listener, and I sometimes can be a little more assertive than perhaps I should be. But
Wow.
Wow.
The 4 things that I'm frustrated about as a businessman is, number 1, the attendance. I don't know how you succeed by not showing up. And the attendance in Detroit Public Schools today is deplorable. Last year, they gave me some statistics. There are 8 million total days that these kids should be going to school, and they went to school 6 million. That means they missed 2 million. That's 25% of the time. For each kid, if it was all average, that means they're missing 45 days of school a year. You can't go anywhere. So that's number 1. Number 2 is there's so many empty positions at DPS, it's like a crisis. They gave me the numbers, 830 empty positions. 350 of them are supported by the budget that aren't filled, and another 500 that they could fill by federal grants, but they can't find people to put in the position, so they don't get the federal grant. I think that's just a crisis proportion. The third thing is student count. They have a reprieve. 5,000 are coming back in from EAA, but we've had 20 years of decline. And if that continues, you can't fix the budget permanently forever. So those are three really big things that the community could get behind, especially the attendance. Everywhere I go and talk about attendance, and I've been talking about this for 3 years, I hear the excuses why. And I say to myself, I wonder if Vince Lombardi would accept all those excuses if the Green Bay Packers were continuously losing. I wonder if an auto company would accept those excuses if 25% of the workers didn't show up and you sent a car out into the marketplace that didn't have a bumper and didn't have headlights, and how far it would go. That's equivalent to what we're doing.
So what's the question?
I said to him, how do we fix those 3 things?
So I share John's sense of urgency. I think frankly, we need a sense of urgency and a greater sense of urgency in our school system. And so on the attendance issue, you'll hear me say this often, I think every problem has a solution, and every obstacle can be overcome. And so when we look at attendance, we have to look at transportation. I think there's an opportunity to go deeper in the community, in neighborhoods, to pick up children. That has an economic strategy, and things need to be done differently within the budget to do that. I think we look at personnel that can actively support truant parents or truant children, engage parents, more home visits. And then we have to look at the wraparound services that talked about earlier, and that were mentioned in trying to solve the reality of poverty, not excuse, but a reality, and how do we create the right systems to overcome that. Enrollment, like I said, I think we need to first focus on the students that are in the school system, improve their experience, and that by word of mouth will lead more parents to come back. We have to reinvent programming. We have to reinvent schools and the experience, and we will do that short-term and long-term to bring parents back. And then the issue of positions is an important one. And when we talk about short-term wins or short-term needs, we have to be as close to fully staffed by the fall as possible. And that has to be one of our priorities going into next year. I think that there are already things that I see structurally, organizationally, that can help the vacancy challenge regarding teachers that are in special assignment at the district level or the school level. And we have to be more strategic about salaries. Short-term, long-term. We have a contract that we're hoping to finalize, which will give a bump to teacher salaries. That's only going to be more of the short-term solution. We have to have a long one. And we have to be more strategic with pipeline development. We have to get the best and brightest in undergraduate schools to go into teaching, not into medicine, not into law, not into other fields that appear to be more advantageous economically, but talk about the change that can happen in Detroit based on their investment. There's no story stronger to tell than the one in Detroit as far as the impact you can have on a community and on children. We just have to tell that story and make the experience then, when we have the commitment, a stronger one. And it goes back to the earlier point, and we can't underestimate the fact that organizationally, in many ways, we have functioned over the last 10 years in crisis mode. You know, think about running a business. If you're constantly in crisis mode, you're not developing people, you're not developing pipeline, you're not reflecting, you're not being strategic, you're not learning and growing, you're reacting. And now is the time to shift, to go into an organization that's strategic, thoughtful, and visionary, not reactive. But that's how we've been functioning, and that leads to a culture where people don't want to go to or stay in. And that has to change short-term and long-term.
All right, so we have 13 minutes left, and I have a huge stack of questions. So here's what we're going to do. So rather than give full, complete, thoughtful, analytic answers to all of these questions, we are going to do the speed round, okay? Any of you can answer any of the questions, but you get one sentence, maybe two, if the second sentence is really important, okay? And I want the audience, if you think the second sentence wasn't important, you let them know. All right, ready, let's go. Number one, do we still need a Detroit Education Commission or something like it to rationalize the public education system in Detroit?
Hell yes.
Without question.
Maybe.
Number two, you mentioned the trauma and economic stress that Detroit students experience. How will DPSCD work to address the emotional and mental health of their students to prepare them for academic success?
Couple words. I can't do that in one. We have to realize that the support services that we all have access to, as far as being in the middle class, has to be expanded. And I think it's more strategic to place them in schools. I was on the cusp of doing that in Jacksonville, where you move support services at the school site. I think it's already happening in Detroit in some schools, but trying to scale that. So you're not requiring parents to go through red tape and bureaucracy to access basic necessities. And I think that will go a long way with improving attendance, building self-esteem, and preventing the obstacles that get in the way of learning. But so school site support and resources, not out necessarily in the greater community.
All right. What are the plans or agenda being set towards special education? Specifically, this question says specifically hearing impaired children, but let's keep it broad.
Special education lost $40 million last year. If that money could be reallocated into the classroom, the small number of dollars that are currently making their way to the classroom would improve dramatically. Special education has to get fixed.
It's an area in emphasis. We are having thoughts right now of some type of audit to understand where we are to rebuild systems and processes. As someone who should have had an IEP as a child, someone whose two children have IEPs, this is very personal to me, and something that I think I've done a good job of in my previous work. We have to rebuild systems for children. We also have to recognize that Detroit is disproportionately educating the majority of students with IEPs in Metro Detroit. We're embracing that challenge, but that also has to come with additional support through state funds and federal funds, but that's a broader and needed conversation.
That's where the playing field really just isn't even right now.
Right.
What can local colleges and universities do to support your efforts to recruit teachers? Please be specific.
Move to internship models and resident models, not just learning how to teach in a college classroom. And so when doctors before becoming a doctor, you actually spend time shadowing. You observe. You just don't get thrown to the lions, if you will. And we have to be more thoughtful about internships, residents, identifying master teachers in the school system so that our young new teachers can learn what not to do before they're accountable to teaching children. That's precise. And business community opportunity, we have to incentivize our best and our brightest to become teachers. And you know, we can always talk about good-hearted impact on children. That's all great, but at the end of the day, we got to talk about paying people the right kind of dollars to become teachers, because ultimately it is about the bottom line for a lot of individuals and families, and that we have to talk about that differently, especially in the context of Detroit. We have a national challenge. That challenge is more profound in Detroit and always will be in large urban school districts.
And I think it's important, too, to point out that while this panel is focused on Detroit, rightfully so, that Michigan as a state has not performed well in the educational arena, and we are, in a race to mediocrity. This is an issue that affects everyone. And at the very least, supporting schools and colleges that train teachers and and filling the pipeline, as Dr. Vitti pointed out, is critical. But also, young people listen to the world around them, and when all the messages that they hear about teachers is negative, that they're overpaid, that they don't work in the summer, all these messages are not helpful messages in terms of creating interest in a profession. It is a profession, and professions are honored and respected, and we need to honor and respect the profession of teaching because arguably they are doing the most important work that any family and any human being wants, and that is educating their children.
All right. What is your vision when it comes specifically to parent engagement in our schools?
So I think parents, I often say we have to shift from parents being supply parents to demand parents. One way that I've done that is by creating a parent academy, that we build the capacity of parents to be active in their child's education. Despite what people think, parents want the best for their child, and they know that education is a vehicle to do that. The problem is they haven't always had positive experience in their own schooling, and they're often intimidated by the process. We have to help parents navigate through the system, ask the right questions, know what good programming and good instruction looks like, build their capacity to do that, help them be better parents, discipline issues, monitoring social media, picking friends, and then helping them be what I call whole parents. Real hard to focus on education when you're trying to struggle to keep a job to pay the light bill. So financial literacy classes, how to interview for jobs, how to build a resume are all components of the Parent Academy, which I hope to bring. And those are things that I started with private investment that then translated into the district paying for.
All right. Given the recent legislation and estimates that only 1 in 10 children in Detroit are not proficient in reading by the 3rd grade, how important is the role of early childhood education in promoting literacy and preventing the retention of nearly all children? And I'll also add my question on that, which is that some cities, New York City just added not just pre-K for all, meaning free pre-K for 4-year-olds, but also 3K for all. So they're going to be extending preschool to kids as young as 3 to everyone. Is there the importance of early childhood education, obviously, but any sort of specifics as far as what is possible in Detroit?
I guess I'll take this. I think we have to talk about quality. In Florida, there was a big initiative, 4-year-old program. I think access is important, but we have to talk about quality. So who's actually teaching our children at that young age? Are they explicit about literacy instruction? It can't just be babysitting. It has to be deep intervention in literacy development. So very interested in expanding pre-K, but I want to do it with quality and thoroughness. Literacy, as we know, can throw out all the cliches about foundation of education, but I think the opportunity for the school district is to have curriculum that's directly aligned to the standards, that make literacy instruction easier and be more explicit with intervention early on. We can't wait to 3rd grade to make sure kids are on grade level. We have to start in kindergarten or when they're behind. We know they're behind. What's the intervention strategy to work with students in smaller groups and intensify the intervention so that they're at grade level by the end of kindergarten and the 1st grade? We've got to stop playing the catch-up game.
I think this also brings up a sort of a corollary point, and that is how we are investing in kids. Actually, what are we doing with the money that's being spent? Detroit gets approximately $14,500 from all sources. I'm sure that there are many, many ways to become much, much more efficient. But I think there's a broader question that all of us in this room have to ask, and that is, given the priority, the high priority of these children, they're the future of our country, are we really spending enough? I know that this is a sort of like a third rail of education. You know, you look at Massachusetts, 22,000. You look at Detroit, it's 14. You look at the suburbs, it's 9. I don't think any of us have really delved into the numbers enough to be able to intellectually and honestly ask the question, are we investing enough in our children?
I think I would say something pretty unusual, and that is John said it all.
All right. What thoughts do you have about the district real estate holdings, properties currently in use for educational purposes, as well as those that are closed and those that are not used for educational purposes?
So lots of opportunities. On the one hand, excited to have access to those buildings when we think about new programs, new opportunities. That was one challenge that I had in Jacksonville, which was we had unveiled lots of new programming, new schools, especially focused on special education, and we didn't have the buildings to do that. Here, that's not the challenge, here meaning Detroit. So excited to do that, but there's no doubt in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about the use of our current buildings. That has to be a combination of residential rates in certain neighborhoods, coupled with performance of schools, and then lastly, coupled with the state of those facilities. In other words, how much money would have to be invested to bring those schools to learning environments that meet the standard of today's education. And that has to be asked in concert with the other two questions. And then I think we have an opportunity to right-size the district. I'm not looking to make any of those decisions now. I think we need to rebuild the school district organizationally and then begin to do that holistic analysis to then make decisions in the next couple of years. But it will have to be done for economic efficiency purposes. And then the buildings that are not used, I think that's a broader conversation with the city and the business community how to use that. I also believe that there's an opportunity to hold some of those assets because the district will eventually need them when folks start moving back into Detroit, and we'll need those buildings for schools. So it'll be a combination, I think, of a private solution and something that's done more internally by the district.
I think this is a real opportunity to be creative because these, we have systematically, perhaps for the right reasons, but we have systematically destroyed a number of neighborhoods. Schools are essential. These buildings sit in the midst of communities. It is absolutely essential that we figure out what to do with these facilities, not just tear them down, not just let them keep sitting there, but think creatively in partnership about the possible uses of those facilities.
Well, thank you. We need to wrap up, but really quickly, I just want to get in one more question. I'll thank the audience for all those great questions. But I think everybody really wants to know, since you've said you're going to send your children, or try to send your children to DPS-CD, what's that like as a parent when you go to these schools and you're assessing them for your children? What are the questions you're asking, and what are you seeing that makes you feel comfortable that your kids will thrive in those schools, your personal children?
Well, I talked earlier about the district being in survival mode, and for those teachers that have stayed, those principals that have stayed, there's a great deal of commitment that goes along with that. So anytime you're thinking about where to put your children as far as education is concerned, you want them to be connected to educators that deeply believe in the process. And so that's what I've seen when I visited schools. I also see pockets of excellence. I see pockets of great teaching happening. I see pockets of great programming. My challenge and opportunity is scaling that. So that's why I would be willing to put my children in, because of that commitment that educators have to the process. I think down the road, if people give the school system a chance, the challenge that I have often is people make assumptions about schools without even visiting them. Actually visit the school and visit the classrooms. Don't go on stereotypes, don't go on perceptions, don't go entirely on what you read in the newspaper or see on TV, but actually visit the schools themselves. And you see great teachers, great principals, great programs. We're just not telling that story, or the other more negative stories carry the majority of the conversation, not the reality of what's happening. And so as someone with multiple degrees, well-educated, my wife the same way, if we're willing to put our children in a school system, then there are so many other parents that should do the exact same thing.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for this great conversation, and thanks to the audience as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Good start.
And thanks to the Skillman
Thank you.
Foundation for sponsoring the